I was elbow deep in tangled wires when I heard my name. Anna Reynolds, project lead. Final phase. It wasn't said in admiration. It was Ron, the operations manager, reading off the team list in the Monday status meeting like he was checking off expired milk. 3 years. 3 years of lost weekends, overnight debugging sessions, and holding this project together with duct tape, stubbornness, and about 6 different versions of coffee-fueled miracles. And now, I wasn't even a footnote in my own project's final review. That's when I knew I wasn't a valued part of the team. I was a disposable cog they'd burn out and toss aside the moment the wheels stopped squeaking. I didn't start this job with naive hopes of glory. I started because I believed in the work. A multi-site logistics automation system, designed from scratch, built for scalability, precision, and resilience. The kind of system that could transform warehouses across the country. What I didn't realize back then was how eager corporate would be to take my brainchild and parade it around as their own invention. They loved the headlines. They loved the client praise. They just didn't love me. Ron droned on about cost efficiencies, while my boss, Ethan, the kind of man who thought leadership was measured in smirks and LinkedIn posts, leaned back in his chair, eyes already on the next deal. I caught his glance as I packed up my notes. He gave me that look. You know the one. The don't get too comfortable look. I got the official news 2 days later. No closed-door meeting, no handshake. Just a calendar invite titled Transition Discussion. Ethan didn't even flinch when he said it. Time to cut the useless staff, he smirked, like he was telling me the coffee machine broke. Like 3 years of my life were a rounding error on his spreadsheet. I smiled, nodded, and I left. Because here's what they never understood. While they were busy taking credit, I was busy taking notes. Every update, every configuration, every hardware module deployed on site, especially the component. A single critical interface unit that sat at the heart of the system's operational sync. My design, my build, registered under Reynolds Integrated Systems, LLC. I'd brought it in quietly during Phase 2 when their procurement team's vendor unit kept overheating under load. Temporary fix, I told them. They shrugged. As long as the graphs looked pretty for the client review, nobody asked where it came from. They didn't log it. They didn't license it. They didn't even know it wasn't theirs. I called it Pulse Core, a heartbeat for a system they thought ran on corporate genius. And the best part? I had the patents, the manufacturing rights, and the licensing clauses they never even thought to question. The entire logistics operation they were about to roll out nationwide? It pulsed through my hardware, my heart. But I didn't say a word that day. Didn't gloat. Didn't threaten. I just signed the exit papers, shook Michelle from HR's cold, apologetic hand, and walked out of that glass box office with a severance packet lighter than my lunch receipt. On the outside, I was another layoff. A downsized name on a bloated org chart. On the inside, I was the storm they didn't see coming. Because Pulse Core wasn't just a controller. It was leverage. And the second they tried to scale the system without paying attention to the details, they'd learn exactly how expensive oversight could be. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't even angry. This wasn't about payback. This was about value. Mine. And when the invoice hit their inbox, they'd finally understand the cost of underestimating the person who built their empire from the ground up. One heartbeat at a time. 2 days after I walked out, the press release hit. Company X unveils revolutionary logistics sync system, internally developed, engineered for scale. Internally developed. I actually laughed. The article was everywhere. Industry blogs, LinkedIn, even picked up by a mid-tier tech magazine. Ethan's smug face plastered on the cover, arms crossed like he personally soldered the circuits himself. They called it a triumph of internal innovation. No mention of the team. Definitely no mention of me. But I wasn't surprised. I'd seen it coming a mile away. Ethan was the type who'd take credit for sunrise if you gave him a long enough meeting. He loved optics. Loved the narrative of being the visionary CEO disrupting logistics with cutting-edge tech. And that would have been fine. If it weren't for one small, inconvenient fact. The entire system's sync controller, Pulse Core, was mine. And I didn't mean that in the I worked hard on it kind of way. I meant legally, on paper, on file with the US Patent Office, mine. 3 years earlier, when I'd realized how shaky the company's supply chain components were, I started tinkering after hours. Not out of spite, out of sheer necessity. Because their approved vendor modules overheated if you blinked at them wrong. And because I wasn't going to let my name be attached to a project destined to fail on launch day. So I built Pulse Core. Small, efficient, seamless. And when it worked, I slipped it into the system with a quiet nod from the hardware lead, who honestly couldn't have cared less where the solution came from as long as it fixed his error logs. They never registered it, never documented it, never even noticed. Ethan and his board? They signed off on the rollout roadmap, proudly oblivious that their crown jewel sat on a controller licensed, if they'd bothered to read the fine print, to Reynolds Integrated Systems, LLC. So I waited. I let them bathe in their own headlines. Let them high-five each other in corporate boardrooms, toast with $200 champagne, and polish the shoes they planned to put on my neck. Because I knew the clock was ticking. And Pulse Core? She wasn't designed to be generous. At midnight on the first Monday after my exit, I launched a scheduled update through Pulse Core's backend. A passive check-in. Not malicious, not illegal. Just a simple handshake protocol. If they didn't respond within 30 days with a valid license key, Pulse Core would begin to throttle the system's sync rate by 5% every 24 hours. Not enough to raise alarms right away. Not enough to trigger lawsuits. But enough to gum up operations, delay fulfillment, spike error reports. Just enough friction to make their $50 million pilot project feel like trying to run a marathon in molasses. I didn't need revenge. I needed leverage. And this was leverage with a heartbeat. By Thursday, I got the first ping. A LinkedIn message from Megan, the finance analyst I barely remembered. Hey, Anna, hope you're well. Quick question. Did we ever finalize asset transfer forms for your system modules? Trying to tie up some loose ends. Loose ends. I left it unread. By the weekend, the friendly pings turned into polite voicemails, then urgent emails, then calendar invites marked high priority. I ignored them all, because I knew exactly how this would go. They wouldn't panic right away. They'd try to handle it internally, confident they could bypass the system or patch over the problem. But they couldn't. Pulse Core wasn't just plugged in. It was integrated, deeply, deliberately, and entirely by me. By Monday morning, I got a text from Jamie, an old teammate still stuck in that circus. Not sure if you heard, but Ops is freaking out. Sync delays are creeping in. People are blaming the firmware. Ron's losing it. I just smiled, because I knew what they didn't. This wasn't a glitch. This was the cost of forgetting who built their empire. And I was just getting started. By the start of week 2, the cracks weren't just showing. They were spreading. I didn't even have to check the system logs. The reports started coming to me. First, it was Jamie again. Hey, did you hear? They brought in a consultant from Centric Systems. Tried patching the sync delays. Total flop. Made it worse. I could picture it. Some overpaid outside tech guru poking around Pulse Core's environment like a tourist trying to read a subway map upside down. I built Pulse Core with one thing in mind: precision. It wasn't just a hardware module. It was the brainstem of their entire fulfillment sync. You couldn't patch over it. You couldn't swap it out. And you sure as hell couldn't replace it with a mass market controller off a supplier shelf. But they tried. Oh, they tried. By Wednesday, I got another text. This time from a DevOps guy I barely knew, Ali, the golden retriever of the team. Anna, they're running diagnostics on all sync controllers. Warehouse ops is crawling. Orders delayed. Clients asking questions. You didn't hear that from me. I hadn't needed to. PulseCore was doing exactly what I designed her to do. The handshake protocol continued its silent countdown. 5% sync degradation every 24 hours past the license renewal date. By Friday, they were 10 days past due. And the system was already running at 60% capacity. Warehouse operations slowed, delivery windows stretched, and the clients? They noticed. Eastbrook Logistics, one of their flagship partners, pulled a routine audit on Friday afternoon and flagged a 4-hour delay on their order sync report. I heard about it through Jamie, who heard it from a warehouse lead, who heard it from Ron himself. Ethan flipped, threw his coffee across the floor, said heads would roll. But here's the thing. They still didn't get it. They still thought this was a technical hiccup, a firmware bug, a patch away from resolution, because they couldn't fathom the possibility that their redundant, disposable project lead had walked out the door holding the only key that kept their system alive. I started getting the emails directly now. Not from HR, not from finance. From Ethan. Anna, need to connect ASAP regarding some lingering IP clarifications. No hard feelings, just tying up loose ends. Let me know when you're free. I wasn't free, and there were plenty of hard feelings. None of them mine. I didn't answer. Instead, I checked PulseCore's dashboard. Sync integrity holding. Load balancing stable. Throttle degradation now at 45%. By Monday, they'd be underwater. It was almost too easy. They'd built their entire operation on something they didn't even bother to understand. Worse, they'd made sure the person who did understand it was out the door with a smile and a severance check that barely covered a week's rent. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even smug. I was patient. Because this wasn't about sabotage. I wasn't trying to destroy them. I was letting them destroy themselves. And the part that still amazes me? Even now. They were still looking for a workaround instead of picking up the phone and asking the one question that could have saved them. What's your price? But arrogance. Arrogance makes people blind. They thought I'd move on. They thought I'd let it go. They thought a pat on the head and a box of corporate swag was enough to erase 3 years of blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. And now? They were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their careers, because by the end of that week, the countdown would hit critical. And PulseCore? She'd stop asking nicely. By the start of week 3, their silence cracked. The emails stopped being polite. No more, hope you're well or let's connect. Now it was. Immediate action required. IP licensing confirmation. Urgent. Operational risk mitigation. Contact requested. Ethan even tried calling. Twice. Blocked both times. I wasn't avoiding them out of spite. I was giving them time. Time to realize the cost of underestimating the person who built the heart of their system. And now? Time was up. Monday morning, 4 a.m. sharp. PulseCore's handshake protocol expired. The passive throttling stopped. Because now, it wasn't about slowing them down. It was about showing them what happens when you forget who actually holds the keys. PulseCore initiated her Phase 2 routine. Controlled sync halt. System-wide idle command. Order queues froze. Warehouse drones parked themselves mid-route, blinking like confused toddlers who'd been told the game was over before it started. Inventory management went dark. Auto-sorting belts stopped moving. And the client dashboards? 404 errors across the board. I didn't even need a live feed to picture it. A warehouse floor full of frozen bots, operators rebooting tablets, Ron yelling into a headset, and Ethan pacing, watching everything fall apart in slow motion. By 8 a.m., Jamie texted me a photo. A loading dock stacked with unsorted inventory, and two managers arguing over who should call Eastbrook before the client called them. It's a dumpster fire. That's all he wrote. And I smiled. Because the thing about systems like this, it's not the shutdown that kills you. It's the timing. Eastbrook Logistics was scheduled for an in-person operations audit that morning. They were sending their VP of supply chain, a man known for gutting entire contracts over a 5-minute delay. Ethan must have known it too, because at exactly 9:13 a.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an email. It was a text. Anna, we need to talk. Please. Not the cocky, useless staff speech. Not the veiled threats or empty flattery. Just 2 words that said everything. Please, talk. But I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet, because they still thought this was negotiable. I opened PulseCore's command interface and checked the logs. Everything was running exactly as designed. The system wasn't broken. It wasn't hacked. It wasn't sabotaged. It was simply compliant. Compliant with the terms they never read. Compliant with the licensing agreement they never signed. Compliant with the owner, me. And if they wanted PulseCore to wake up, they needed to accept the reality they'd spent 3 years denying. I wasn't just a project lead. I wasn't a technician. I wasn't even a former employee. I was the system's owner. And now, their silent partner. By noon, Ethan sent one final message. Name your price. I stared at the screen. Let the words settle. Because this wasn't revenge. It wasn't personal. It was business. Cold. Calculated. Fair. They'd spent years thinking I was lucky to have a seat at their table. Now they understood. I wasn't fighting for a seat. I owned the damn table. And the bill for forgetting that? It just came due. I let Ethan's message sit in my inbox for exactly 12 hours. Not because I needed time to think, but because sometimes silence speaks louder than any words. By the time I replied, the warehouse was on its 3rd emergency reboot attempt. Jamie sent me a screenshot of the floor dashboard. Red error messages stacked like a digital house of cards. Fulfillment delays hit 72 hours. Client inquiries had tripled. And Eastbrook Logistics? They'd suspended new orders pending technical review. Translation: they were one hiccup away from pulling the plug entirely. I opened a blank email, kept it simple, professional, director. Ethan, attached is the licensing agreement for continued use of the PulseCore system, effective immediately upon signature and initial payment. Then I dropped the bomb. License fee, $85,000 per month. Retroactive to my departure date, paid quarterly in advance. Non-transferable, non-negotiable. And the final clause? Failure to comply within 48 hours results in permanent system lockout and deactivation of all operational sync functions. I signed it. Anna Reynolds, CEO, Reynolds Integrated Systems, LLC. No apology. No explanation. No begging. Just business. I hit send and poured myself a coffee. By morning, I had a reply. Not from Ethan. From Meredith, General Counsel. Her email was drenched in legalese, the kind that sounds polite but carries the whiff of corporate desperation. We believe there may have been a misunderstanding regarding the integration of proprietary components within our system architecture. We are eager to resolve this amicably and are open to discussing licensing terms that reflect industry standards. Industry standards? I almost laughed. Industry standards don't apply when the industry's heartbeat sits in a controller you don't own. I replied with a single sentence. The terms are final. The countdown continues. 48 hours. Tick-tock. By the next afternoon, I got a call. A direct one. Ethan. I let it ring twice before answering. Anna? His voice cracked like a man who hadn't slept in days. We didn't realize. About the module. About you. I let the silence hang. I want to fix this. He rushed on. We want to fix this. Whatever it takes. You've got the paperwork. Just don't shut us down. There it was. The shift. The same man who smirked at me across a conference table and called me useless staff now sounded like a teenager begging not to lose the car keys. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But this wasn't personal. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for value. You'll sign the agreement, I said calmly. And I'll oversee integration. Personally. As a consultant. Independent consultant, he echoed. Correct. 6-month contract. Triple my former salary. Paid up front. No NDAs. All development and tech remain property of Reynolds Integrated Systems. I heard him swallow. And, I added, I'll need direct client access. He didn't answer right away, but I wasn't worried. They had no choice. They built their future on my work, and now the future had a name. Mine. I'll have legal draft it, he said finally, voice flat, defeated. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. I'll expect it by morning. I ended the call before he could reply. It wasn't about being cruel. It was about being clear. I wasn't their employee anymore. I wasn't their backup plan. I was their lifeline. And by this time tomorrow, the papers would prove it. The signed agreement hit my inbox at 7:42 a.m. sharp. Triple my former salary. 6 months up front. Direct client access guaranteed. No NDAs. All intellectual property rights retained by Reynolds Integrated Systems. It was everything I'd asked for. Everything they never thought they'd have to give. By 9 a.m., I walked back into the same glass office where I'd been fired 3 weeks earlier. Only this time, I wasn't holding a severance envelope. I was holding a contract. Ethan met me at the door. Gone was the sharp suit, the confident smirk. He looked like a man who'd spent a week wrestling a bear and lost. Anna. He nodded stiffly, eyes darting to the badge clipped on my coat. It didn't say staff. It didn't even say consultant. It said owner, Reynolds Integrated Systems. I smiled. Professional, polite, cold. We didn't exchange pleasantries. By 9:15 a.m., I was on the warehouse floor. It was a mess. Pallets stacked at wrong terminals. Bots powered down in mid-route. Supervisors barking into radios. Managers scrambling through error logs they didn't understand. I plugged my secure drive into the primary server, launched PulseCore's restoration protocol, watched the system blink back to life. Heartbeat restored. Sync integrity at 99.8%. Operational flow normal within 90 seconds. The floor exhaled like a man pulled from deep water. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The results spoke louder than any speech. Ethan hovered behind me, waiting for some grand moment. And I told you so. A smug smirk. He got nothing. Because I wasn't here for that. I was here to rebuild what they'd nearly destroyed. And to prove one last point. At 11 a.m., I called a team huddle. Managers, engineers, operators. I stood in front of them, not as an employee, not as a contractor, but as a partner. I'm not here to patch your mistakes, I said evenly. I'm here to make sure this system works. For your clients and for every person on this floor who's been left holding the bag when leadership failed them. No sugarcoating, no soft landings. The room went silent, but in the back I saw Jamie, and Allie, and a few others. Faces I recognized from years of late nights and early mornings. And they nodded, because they got it. They'd been the gears turning in the shadows while people like Ethan strutted on stage. And now, someone who understood the weight of their work was finally standing with them. I stayed 2 hours on site, walked the floor, listened, took notes, not for a report, not for PR. For the next phase. One I'd be leading on my terms, because this wasn't a rescue. This was a takeover. By 2 p.m., I left the building the same way I entered. Head high, back straight. No grand exit, no applause. Just quiet, professional control. But before I walked out, I caught Ethan watching me from his office window. I met his gaze, held it, and I smiled. The kind of smile you give when you've won without ever having to raise your voice. Because I hadn't just saved their operation. I'd saved myself. From a system that tried to use me up and throw me away. From a culture that saw value in numbers, not people. And maybe, just maybe, from ever doubting my worth again. Some people think power is about having the loudest voice in the room. It's not. Power is knowing exactly what you're worth. And never letting anyone forget it. Not for a paycheck, not for a title, not even for revenge. Because real power? It's silent. It's patient. And when the time is right, it's unstoppable.